I want to turn back to Louisville now and the fallout from the decision to not charge any officers in relation to the killing of Breonna Taylor. This 26-year-old has also been charged with wanton endangerment and the assault of a police officer during Wednesday night's protests. He's accused of shooting two police officers. As you can see, hundreds of people are out on the streets, angry at the decision not to prosecute the policeman who killed Breonna Taylor. Louisville police say they arrested 130 people. Marvis Herring's a reporter for CBS's WLKY News in Louisville, Kentucky. He's been outside the police station where some of the protesters are being held.
Well, we've been out here since about 4 a.m. this morning, and we really have been able to see even some of the protesters. You can see behind me, that's the jail, Metro Corrections, who were released coming right over to Jefferson Square Park, just a few feet away, to pay respects again to Breonna Taylor, some of them crying and even just screaming out, saying that justice was just not served, not only in this case, but also to hear that the only charges pertaining to one police officer and only involving those charges are involving Breonna Taylor's neighbors, those bullets that hit her neighbor's apartment. So really the mood has been somber. It's been emotional. It's been somewhat quieter out here, but we've also started to see the Kentucky National Guard and LMPD really start to assemble as well.
Let's remind ourselves what happened to Breonna Taylor. She was a 26-year-old emergency medical technician, and in March she was shot 8 times after police entered her home in the middle of the night under what's called a no-knock warrant. Her boyfriend is a licensed gun owner, and he exchanged fire with the officers thinking they were burglars. In fact, they were on a drug raid and were looking for a suspect who didn't live at the house. No drugs were found at the property. Subsequently, one of the officers was fired, 2 others were placed on leave. None were charged with any crimes. It's clear the process over what happened to Ms. Taylor and the decision not to charge the officers directly with her death will continue. Today, the US Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden, has urged Americans to protest peacefully. Here's what he told reporters in Charlotte, North Carolina.
They should be peaceful. Do not sully her memory or her mother's by engaging in any violence. It's totally inappropriate for that to happen. And she wouldn't want it, nor would her mother. So I hope they do that.
Well, people aren't just protesting about the Breonna Taylor case. US law enforcement officers kill about 1,000 people a year across the US. Here are some statistics on how those cases are dealt with. Since the beginning of 2005, 121 officers have been arrested on charges of murder or manslaughter in on-duty killings. Of the 95 officers whose cases have concluded, 44 were convicted and often on a lesser charge. Here's more from the professor who compiled that data.
Oftentimes, prosecutors simply don't think that they can obtain a conviction, so they're not willing to bring charges in these cases. And that's very troubling to me because the role of the prosecutor is to seek justice and to do justice. And oftentimes they really sort of skirt around that by simply taking the easy road out and not letting the matters be resolved in court.
Now, Dr. Stinson says he was reviewing his research earlier today and noticed that 7 officers had been charged with killing black women since 2005. He says 6 of those 7 women were actually killed in their own homes. Here he is again.
So that's something I need to go back and take a closer look at. It's something that was in my data that I didn't even realize. But the fact that we're seeing cases where black women are being killed by police in their own homes is very troubling to me.
Well, let's bring in the BBC's Larry Madawi, who's been covering this story. He interviewed Breonna Taylor's family a couple of weeks back. He's live with us from Washington. Larry, how do you assess the reaction to the news yesterday in terms of the scale of the outrage and how it feeds into the broader Black Lives Matter momentum in America at the moment?
The latest anger and disappointment, Ross, regarding the decision by the grand jury in Louisville, Kentucky, a lot of the protesters see it as a continuing sign of the devaluation of black bodies and especially of black women, and the fact that they say the neighbors, the white neighbors of Breonna Taylor and the buildings got more justice than Breonna Taylor did, that the officer was not charged with killing Breonna Taylor, but for endangering the lives of the people that lived around her. And in fact, the Kentucky Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, said that the use of force was justified by the 2 other officers because it was in self-defense. And so the people who've been hitting the streets in New York, in LA, here in Washington, and around the nation still feel that justice was not served in this case, and they will be on the streets until Breonna Taylor, who's become quite famous because her name has been on the cover of magazines, celebrities have been talking about her, and the fact that still a name that they have to say at protests speaks to how America treats its black community.
And with specific reference to her case, is this the end of the road in terms of whether these officers could face further charges?
There is one other alternative here. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is also investigating this case to see if Breonna Taylor's civil rights were violated in this case, and they might prefer charges against the officers. That's the final alternative here, because locally, the Louisville Metro Police Department, the prosecutor recused himself. That's how it ended up on Daniel Cameron, the AG's hands, and that's the grand jury decision. And there's a joke in legal circles in America that a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich, which is it's based on how much evidence you present to the grand jury, and the fact that they feel the grand jury didn't see all the evidence, and even the Kentucky Attorney General has called for the evidence and the files to be released, even though these things are usually secret, and that might not happen, speaks to the disaffection with the outcome there.